Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. Why is euthanasia wrong? Well, the word comes from two Greek roots. Eu, which is the word for good. You see this in euphemism, a good name. Something euphemistic means you're putting a good spin on something that is bad. Thanatos is the Greek god of death. So it literally means good death. This is kind of carried over into English with the phrase mercy killing. So why is euthanasia wrong? Well, euthanasia is the unjust killing of someone who's in pain or is otherwise incapacitated or is suffering. Whether the person is doing it voluntarily, in which we call it assisted suicide, or involuntary, say they're in a coma, and their parents or their doctors decide that death is the only response to their problems. The following countries have legalized euthanasia. The Netherlands in 2002 became the first country to legalize assisted suicide and euthanasia, only in, of course, very specific circumstances which are growing ever widening with each passing year. Belgium followed the same year. Belgium doesn't cover assisted suicide in their current laws, but it was extended in 2014 to terminally ill children, quote, suffering beyond medical help, not defined. The US, through the state of Oregon, was the first state to legalize assisted suicide in 1997. That has spread now to Washington and Vermont. Courts in Montana and New Mexico have ruled in favor of assisted suicide. So the European scourge is also coming home here to the United States. Germany, the UK, Switzerland, they're all following this secularist route to euthanasia as the answer to suffering. Now, suffering hurts. The Japanese film director Akira Kurosawa said famously that man comes into the world crying, and when he's cried enough, he dies, which is kind of depressing and accidentally funny to me. That's just my sense of humor. But it does underline the fact that life is suffering. A lot of things happen in this world that hurt, that seem random, unfair, unjust, evil even. In the case of a human being who's suffering, that human being needs support, inspiration, encouragement, pain relief, and a sense of community to come along the sufferer, come alongside and say, we know it hurts. There might be a way we can fix this, make it better. But even if the illness is terminal, hastening death through euthanasia is not going to provide a culture of life or love. It's going to instill in people a sense of despair, because as long as they have access to a drug or some other treatment that will end their lives, that becomes sort of a swan song, a kind of a siren whispering in their ear. You can leave this life, you can exit under your own terms. Hence the phrase, death with dignity. And that's the irony, because at the heart of the euthanasia movement is using human dignity against itself. When you're sick or suffering, no matter how old, you don't lose your dignity any more than when you're in the womb. You don't have any dignity because we can't see you, we can't hear you. Just because of the mode of breathing and eating that the soon-to-be-born brothers and sisters around us have, that difference between breathing and eating doesn't affect human dignity. So too, when you enter into the precinct of terrible suffering, it doesn't mean that you've lost your dignity. In fact, great dignity can shine forth through suffering well handled, with pain medication, with medical care, with people, the 5 people around you, say, who are caring for you, even if it's one person. Euthanasia is succumbing to a sense of despair and hopelessness. And what we need to do in the media is highlight stories of people who've overcome temptations to give in to despair. People in terrible scenarios that rival or match in a similar way the conditions suffered by people who famously killed themselves. Those people, you can do an online search, I won't name them now. They achieve a lot of notoriety and a certain level of fame when they kill themselves. Whereas people who choose life at the end of life are often unknown. And it's been proven statistically that when you have an example of a high-profile suicide or a high-profile euthanasia, that has a Werther effect. It has a kind of mimetic or imitative effect on people who are similarly suffering, and it urges them in a greater percentage of times to do likewise. The Papageno effect is the reverse. When people hear of someone who's undergone some terrible affliction or disease or disorder or what have you, and they choose life, and they bear it with Christian, let's say, Christian solidarity with Christ on the cross, that can instill a great amount of hope to someone who feels like they're suffering in a silo. And isn't that part of the terrible burden of suffering, is the sense that no one understands, no one can enter into my hermetically sealed chamber of doom and darkness. That is the work of the Catholic Church, to open those doors and shed light on that experience of darkness. As St. John Paul II wrote in his Salvifici Doloris, is a beautiful document on Christian suffering. The knowledge that Christ Jesus on the cross suffered torments infinitely worse than any human suffering can be a source of profound consolation and encouragement to keep going ahead one step at a time, even though it hurts. So we need to focus on medical care, pain relief, pain management, to help our brothers and sisters who are sick and suffering, who yet have not lost their dignity. Dignity can be seen as a kind of wedding vow. It's a promise, this sense of who we are as baptized followers of Christ, or just as human beings created by the Creator, made in His image and likeness. The force behind the dignity becomes nullified. As soon as you can take away someone's dignity, they become more manageable. We can thingify them. We can, as the Latinists say, reify them, R-E-I. That's what the Jim Crow laws and the KKK did to people of different skin color, using words and terms that thingify them, that make them animals or property or objects. You see this at work with rape victims who aren't believed, unborn babies, to make them suitable objects for abortion, are called things like products of conception, blob of tissues, clump of cells. They're all euphemisms. We need to call euthanasia what it is. It's the unjust killing of someone who's vulnerable and yet who has not lost their dignity. Check out the Patrick Coffin Show podcast. It runs every Tuesday morning. We also have a website called coffinnation.com. Global now, by God's grace, community of culture builders, coffinnation.com. Get on the waiting list and climb aboard. We have a blast building a better culture. One heart, one marriage, one family at a time. Be a saint. What else is there?